thanks, Phil, for coordinating everything. And I just want to say, like, all of the speakers that put so much time and effort into doing these talks, like, it really is a lot of work. So do me a personal favor, and if any of you saw a talk that you really liked, even if you don't have a question or a comment, just go up to that presenter and say, hey, I loved your talk. Thanks for giving it. So also thank you, Phil, for giving me this, this clicker. This is the second time I've given a presentation in Folkestone with a piece of borrowed equipment from Phil. The first time I learned 3 very important lessons. 1, live coding is always very risky. 2, always do your presentations on your own equipment. And 3, US and UK keyboards, very different. Nobody look up that talk. Okay, it was a lightning talk, we got through it. All right, so you are all here for this talk, why software engineering interviews are broken and how to actually fix them. And if this is not the talk that you're supposed to be at, then you are at the wrong conference, because for some reason, they gave me a keynote. We'll see if he regrets this decision in, roughly 60 minutes or so. A little bit about who I am and why I'm on stage, aside from the fact that I'm fabulous and charismatic and wonderful and all those sorts of things. My name's Kristen. I spent many years as a software engineer at Google. When I left Google, I was a staff software engineer. And I say that, I only make that distinction because I want to acknowledge that I can give this talk because of a couple of reasons of privilege associated with making staff. So 1, making staff gave me the confidence in my competency to kind of question the software engineering interview process. When you're a junior engineer and you do an interview for a job you think you might be well suited for and they say no, you think, okay, there's something wrong with me. Like, I did a bad job. When you're a staff engineer and you're interviewing for a job and you really feel like you'd be a strong candidate and you don't get an offer, you can start thinking, hey, maybe it's not just me. Maybe there's something funky with the process. At least 4 people at Google think I'm smart, so I don't know. I do also want to say, there's an error in this slide. For those of you that don't know, Google did a major rebrand of their logo. That's much better. It's very different. It's important to make that distinction. While I was at Google, I was on the C++ core libraries team, which is why I'm associated with this conference and other C++ conferences. When I was there, I did a lot of work making the libraries extensible, maintainable, usable, readable, and efficient using the libraries that shipped as part of the Clang LLVM compiler. I gave a talk about this at CVPCon. It's called How to Write Your First Automated Refactoring Tool, but I titled the talk before I understood what search engine optimization was, so I really should have just called it How to Write Your First Clang Tidy, because that's what the talk is. So if you do want to write a Clang Tidy, I would suggest you check it out. Which gets me to the second reason I feel a little bit privileged, having been a staff software engineer, and I feel comfortable giving this talk, which is that I hope it does give me some credibility with the audience, AKA you. There is something to be said about titles mattering, and when you make a certain level, it kind of endows a certain level of credibility. Again, I hope so. If anybody disagrees with me, don't tell me, because I still have to make it through the rest of this talk. All right, I don't have, normally I'd be looking at the screen to see what my next slide is, but, technical difficulties, I guess. All right, so now that we know who I am, we're gonna talk about why you should care about this topic. And this is gonna be a little bit of an interactive talk, so please humor me and participate. And I'm looking at these slides, I don't need to do this. All right, I know this, I've done this a million times. Okay, raise your hand if you in the audience are an engineer. Okay, keep your hands up, raise your hand if you do anything technical, you interview for technical positions, you are an engineering manager, you're a founder or a CEO. All right, so that's pretty much everybody in the room. if you are an engineer, this is the system by, you can lower your hands now. Sorry, I didn't give permission. If you're an engineer, this is the system by which you are assessed. It dictates almost everything about your career progression, from which companies that you can work for, which job postings are viable opportunities for you, like even down to how much you get paid, right? Because we all know that canonically, like the best way to get more money is to job hop. And to do that, you have to interview. If you are an engineering manager, a CEO, a founder, or a technical recruiter, right? This is the system by which you recruit and assess talent, right? It is the biggest way that you bring in people who can actually help you accomplish your key objectives. Without people, we can't deliver on anything. So I hope that, like, given the number of hands that were raised, that I've convinced you that this talk is relevant to you. Okay, one more. Actually, there's gonna be a lot more of hand raising in this talk, but now raise your hand if you feel you could pass a typical software engineering interview today. Like, you and I are gonna go into a room and we're gonna do 5 LeetCode hard problems. All right, you know what? More hands than I expected, but there's still not that many hands. And I hope for people that are watching this talk, a lot of you feel like if you had to go into a room right now and do 5 LeetCode hard problems, you would have a little bit of trouble meeting the benchmarks. So now that I hope I've convinced you that you care, let's talk about what we're gonna talk about in this talk. So first, we're gonna discuss what's the current state of the world, what does the software engineering interview process look like right now. Also, side note, it's always funny to me when people ask for me to upload my slides so they can look at them, because if you've ever been to one of my talks, it's just a bunch of pictures. They don't make any sense when you just have the slideware, but happy to upload them at the end of this anyway. Then we're gonna ask some big philosophical questions. Why do we interview? What is important in an interview process? And does the current interview process serve the companies and the engineers that work at those companies, or are we maybe potentially disenfranchised by this system? Spoiler alert, I believe we are disenfranchised by the system, but I'm gonna bring everybody along with me on the journey anyway, because I do have a bunch of time to fill. All right, again, like, if I would have had the transition a little bit better if I had seen it in the slide, but we're gonna talk about why engineers are disenfranchised by this system, and also why the companies that hire those engineers are disenfranchised. And then, not to worry, I will swoop in, I will save the day, I will solve all of our problems in 90 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I don't have enough time. This is only a 90-minute talk, right? So we can't solve all of our problems in one go, but I do hope that by the end of this talk, we'll have some concrete, we'll have a concrete understanding of the problem and some very concrete means by which we can address the problem and improve the interview process going forward. All right, give me a minute because I need a sip of water. Something that they don't tell you before you give a talk is that you get really thirsty up here. Okay. I really wish I had bigger notes. All right, so what does the typical software engineering interview process look like? Now, caveat, I understand that different types of industries, different companies have variations in their process. You know, if you're at a finance firm, your interview process might look different from being at a big tech firm or a small company. But there are some, similarities regardless of what type of industry you're in. We start off with a filtering process, right? Meant to remove the vast majority of people who are hopefully obviously not suitable for the role. And then we move on to on-sites. Remember when these were actually on-site? Do we all remember actually coding on whiteboards? I remember that. I kind of miss that. And then at the end, there's what I'm gonna call a vibe check, where you talk to a hiring manager or a CEO or a CTO, and they see if you're actually a good fit for the specific team or the specific role. So we look at this As a flow chart, we've got our filtering process. It's typically a phone screen, a take-home test, or a take-home project, which brings you to the on-site, the first round. The second round, the third round, and you've probably noticed at this point that we've run out of room on the slide. And that was to illustrate a point, which is that there are more rounds, many more rounds. You've got round 4, you've got round 5. If you're interviewing for a finance position, you've likely got rounds 6 through 8. And then and only then, once you've run through this full gauntlet, do you make it to the vibe check, where you actually talk to somebody who can tell you whether or not you might actually enjoy doing the work or you'd be a good fit for the team. So this is kind of the structure, and now we kind of want to go over what do we do in those interviews? What constitutes the actual hour or whatever in each of these rounds that we're spending? We're doing these. I feel like this is pretty well understood. Also, I want to just caveat, like LeetCode Hacker Rank, not affiliated with this talk. These are my opinions. They don't endorse this presentation, neither does Google. I no longer work there, right? All of these opinions are my own. So when you look at the diagram, and also I'm realizing I probably should have seen if you can even read this. The idea here that I'm trying to convey is that almost all of these interviews are like some sort of LeetCode type problem. And when you make it to the end, again, you get to your actual like human being just talking about your experience and what you're excited about working on. Okay, so if we are assessed primarily based on these types of questions, it's important that we understand what is the anatomy of a LeetCode problem. What do LeetCode problems look like? There are a couple of key points. So they typically fall into some subset of categories. You've got, your dynamic programming, binary tree traversal, sorting, string manipulation, bit manipulation, or pathfinding. There are a bunch more, I know. I feel like these are a lot of the main categories. There is typically an aha moment, right, where the candidate understands how to implement the solution to the problem, and understanding that solution and how to implement it is a prerequisite for actually writing code, right? If you don't understand how to implement the solution, you're kind of just sitting there with a function signature. There's typically a straightforward and an optimized solution. And understanding the efficiency in terms of big O notation is part of the interview assessment. Okay, that's what a LeetCode problem looks like. So now, I want to ask the question, are LeetCode problems good interview questions? Again, spoiler alert, I think you probably have guessed that I think the answer is no. But like I said, we're here for the experience. It's a journey. To answer this question, we really have to ask another question, which is, why do we interview? What is the point? Is this just for fun? Is it to annoy our senior engineers who are busy working on important projects and need to take time out of their day to conduct an interview that they don't want to conduct? Is it because our company requires some level of community contributions and this is really the easiest and most straightforward one so that we can check that box? Is it to assess a candidate's ability to perform their job successfully? Or is it D, because asking people bespoke questions we already know the answer to makes us feel intellectually superior? And again, I'm asking a bunch of questions with obvious answers. Of course it's D. I'm just kidding. It's to assess a candidate's ability to perform a job successfully, right? We are trying to minimize risk in hiring by predicting future performance. So, to answer my other question about why do we interview, are LeetCode problems good problems for interviews, we have to answer another question, which is what skills do we actually care about? Well, if we interview to minimize risk in hiring, to predict someone's future performance, then the skills that we care about should be the skills that we need on the job. And I know at this point, I've asked you a whole bunch of questions, right? And I said I was coming here with answers, and all I've got are questions, but I promise we'll get there. What skills do we need on the job? So I have some opinions about which skills we need on the job, and we're gonna go through them. So I think that we all agree we need problem solvers. We need people that can take a complicated problem, break it down into its constituent parts, and solve it. We need people that are technically competent, right? And technical competency, to me, means people who understand unit testing, who understand CI/CD integration, who understand that their code is going to be read thousands of times more than it's going to be written. It also means having an appreciation for the general aspects of computer architecture and how software systems work. Okay, this is another audience participation moment. It's kind of fun for me to not have, the next slide, because it's like a little bit, it keeps me on my toes. All right, raise your hand if you've ever received a code review comment you didn't understand. Keep your hands up, by the way. Raise your hand if you ever received a code review comment that made you angry. Raise your hand if you ever received a code review comment that made you sad. All right, that's a lot of people. Keep your hands up. I'm sorry, we're not done yet. Raise your hand if you ever read a design doc and said, why did I just spend 20 minutes of my life reading that? I have no idea what I just read. Keep your hands up. One more and we're done. Raise your hand if you opened a 1,000-line file and there were no code comments. Or there was one comment that said to-do add comments, right? Okay, you can lower your hands. I asked these questions to illustrate my point, which is communication is a fundamental and undervalued aspect of being a software engineer. So I would say communication is one of those skills that we want to assess. Next, we want people that deliver results, right? The reason we have employment, the reason companies pay us, right? The reason we do the work that we do is to solve user pain points. And your users can be external or they can be internal. When I was at Google, my users were people that were leveraging my refactoring tools, right? They were other teams. They're still our users, right? At the end of the day, delivery is what moves the needle. So this is an important aspect of, this is an important skill that we really need to be assessing. Okay, so back to our question, are LeetCode good interview questions? Are LeetCode questions good interview questions? Well, we need to assess how well they do on each of those verticals, right? Because we all agree, like, those are important aspects of our jobs. Okay. It would be nice to have, actually, my speaker notes. Okay, so we have to ask the question, do LeetCode questions effectively assess these skills? Let's go one by one. So, problem solving. LeetCodes are problems. They have solutions. We are asking candidates to provide us with the solution to those problems. So it would be reasonable to think that LeetCode problems do assess problem solving. Unfortunately, the way that we assess a candidate's response to these problems completely precludes our ability to actually assess their creative problem-solving skills. Yeah, you just gotta rely on your memory when you don't have the notes. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Well, let me explain a little bit. So, when I was interviewing, when I was an interviewer, when I was at Google, I conducted some interviews. And as part of conducting interviews, you look at the question bank, you read the questions, and importantly, every question has a rubric associated with it that dictates what a good candidate or a great candidate should do. And let me tell you, these rubrics, I thought they were very, very unreasonable. We are asking candidates to juggle a lot. We are asking them to come up with a straightforward solution. A good candidate will come up with a straightforward solution. A good candidate will come up with an optimized solution. A good candidate will write clean code on the first pass without backtracking. And a good candidate will do all of this while articulating their entire thought process to the interviewer. And the kicker is a candidate has ostensibly 45 minutes to complete this task. Really like 35 to 40 minutes when you take into account the fact that there are some introductory pleasantries, the interviewer has to ask the question, and then they reserve those 5 minutes at the end where they ask you if you have any questions, which you obviously don't have because you're terrified, because you just want them to like give you the job and you basically feel like you're being interrogated, but you ask them anyway to seem interested. So yeah, you don't have a lot of time. Like, to do these questions, wait, hold on. Yeah. I see why people stay at the lectern, right? To answer the question in the time allotted, a candidate really needs to start writing code in the first 2 minutes of hearing the problem statement. And to do that, I feel like you kind of already need to know the answer. And that's okay, I guess, in the current system, because a lot of companies have sprung up to address this need, right? This expectation that candidates can come in, hear a problem, and be able to articulate the solution extremely quickly. Hold on one second. We have these large banks of interview questions that can be practiced so that you can respond to the question almost immediately after you hear it. These are questions that are actually like straight up grouped by companies because they expect candidates to practice. And honestly, if you can hear a problem, answer the question in the first 2 minutes, and come up with 2 optimized solutions, writing clean code perfectly, you've either seen this specific problem or a very similar problem, or you're ChatGPT. Which brings me to my next point, which is that AI cheating is pretty real now. There are startup companies whose entire value proposition is just helping people cheat on interviews. And it kind of makes sense that these companies exist because the stakes are so high. I mean, we are talking about literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars if you think about the entire tenure of a software engineer's career, right? The incentive to cheat is so high, and you will be competing with people who are cheating. And so if you're not cheating, it almost feels like you're losing, and game theory kind of says that you are. God, I really wish I had my slides. All right. I'm like impressed that I've memorized all of this. Okay. But even if AI didn't exist, and everyone was being honest, and we were all solving our problems from scratch, I would still argue that these questions would not be accurately assessing an engineer's ability to problem solve. And that's because coding is not equal to problem solving. And humor me, I'm gonna go into an example here. Say you are a manager. You have a very important Q1 objective. Your bosses are really about it. Like, it's really important that you get it done. This is you, you're on a little pedestal, you're very important. Obviously, in the real world, you could only assign this problem to one person. But say we live in a universe where we can look into 2 parallel universes and see what happens. You can assign this problem to Sue, or you can assign this problem to Lauren, right? And we're gonna see what happens when you assign it to either of them. In universe 1, you assign the problem to Sue. Sue is an expert C++ developer. She knows the standard library in and out. She's brilliant, right? She's your most competent programmer. She immediately jumps right in, starts engineering a solution, and in about a month, she builds a beautifully crafted custom library. It's very nice, right? It's very impressive. She is your best coder, after all. In universe 2, you've given the problem to Lauren. Now, Lauren would be the first to admit she is not her team's most competent programmer, right? But she's very smart. She's also like a little bit social, and she makes it a point to go to lunch and learns whenever they're available. And when she gets this objective, she thinks for a second and remembers a conversation she had with an engineer at one of these lunch and learns, where they were discussing a similar problem. Lauren sets up a meeting with that engineer, and that engineer tells Lauren, hey, we actually did work on that problem for a little bit, and we found this great open source library that addresses the issue. And Lauren says, great. And she brings you back a link to that open source library. Now, in the scenario where Lauren brings you an open source library link, right? It took her a couple of days. And you can immediately give Lauren another task. In the universe where you've given Sue the problem, she wrote a beautifully crafted C++ library that does, by all means, address your solution, or address your problem. And she did it faster than probably anybody else would have. But it still took her a full month. And it's beautiful, but it's also complicated. And now it's your team's job to maintain it. Which brings me to my next point. And don't hate me, but I would say that all code is a liability. Every single line of code can break. Every single line of code can have a bug in it. Every single line of code in your multi-thousand, maybe multi-million line repository needs to be updated. When there are new versions of the standard or security vulnerabilities are identified, or when the government says, hey, if your code's not secure, we're literally not gonna let you use it at all, it's all debt. Every single line is technical debt. So I would argue code is a tool in your toolbox. It might be your most powerful tool. It might be the tool you enjoy using the most, but just because it's the most powerful tool doesn't mean it's always the right tool for your job. For example, I love my electric drill. I think it's so cool using it. I feel very powerful and very handy. But sometimes you don't need an electric drill, you need a screwdriver. And if you try to use an electric drill when you should have used a screwdriver, you're gonna end up with a very broken IKEA dresser, all right? So I say this to try to convey the point that like, code is one means of addressing a problem, but it's like, by no means the only way to address a problem. What we really want is engineers who can solve problems creatively with or without code. All right, just need a drink of water. All right, technical competency, that was skill number 2. So I would argue that no, we're not really addressing technical competency. These questions are academic abstractions that are so far removed from the real world software engineering tasks that we're actually doing. There's no unit testing, there's no CI/CD. The code isn't interacting with other modules, right? We're not designing testable APIs. It's not real world. We're designing code in a sandbox. It's programming, it's not software engineering. And when it comes to the other aspects of technical competency, the understanding of computers and software systems, the only time we really touch on it is when we ask about big O notation. And big O notation is not real. I mean, look, at one time, when architectures were simpler, there was an obvious mapping between the code that you wrote and the code that got executed on your processor. And that is just no longer the case. Hi, Matt. Because we have modern systems that will optimize your code for you. So, okay, side note. I was talking to somebody about including this example. So one of the canonical examples of something that your compiler will do is it will actually replace code that you've written to use more efficient code, right? And so the example that Matt is giving in this talk is dividing an unsigned integer by 2 is just a right bit shift. And somebody mentioned if I was gonna give that example, I should give Matt credit because the example was from his talk. And I was like, oh, credit? We're gonna go way beyond that. There's gonna be a big picture of him in this presentation. So anyway, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that your compiler can change your code. You've all heard the saying that knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is not putting a tomato in a fruit salad. So here, technical competency is knowing that iterating over a linked list and an array, they're both technically O of n operations. Wisdom is understanding that modern processor techniques like prefetching means that iterating over an array is going to be orders of magnitude faster, right? So what I mean to say is the things that we're asking in the interviews when they touch on technical competency, no, we're not covering it. All right. How well do LeetCode type problems assess communication? I really don't think they do a good job. I don't know if you're gonna write a code review comment that's gonna make me cry based on how well you solve a LeetCode type problem. Also, side note, I literally had a friend who almost left the field entirely because her tech lead wrote her such rude code review comments. This person decimated their team. People were leaving left and right because they couldn't communicate well, right? So I don't know how well that person could do LeetCode type problems, but I don't think we assessed their ability to communicate well. Okay, how well do these questions assess somebody's ability to deliver on real world projects? Well, I guess I can ask the question, look, would you rather have an engineer on your team who can recite the STUD algorithm by heart, the STUD algorithm library by heart, never needs to write a manual for loop, ever. Everything can be done with the STUD algorithm library, but can't actually ship anything to prod, or an engineer that, writes their for loops manually, but consistently ships code. I think it's pretty obvious which one you would prefer as a manager or somebody that's founding a company. Okay. Knowing technical details like the standard library is very valuable. It's a super cool skill, but without delivery, it's just not, it doesn't move the needle. Okay. Whew. Give me a break, let me have some more water. What am I doing? Oh, there's water, yeah. I got it. All right. Right. I really do think like delivering is where LeetCode problems fall down the hardest, right? Nobody has ever said, a customer came to me with a feature request, and I just knocked it out of the park. First, I found the longest palindrome in a string. And then, I figured out how much water would collect in the bars of a histogram were it to be caught in a rainstorm without an umbrella. And then, I implemented division in a world where for some reason I no longer have the division operator, right? That's not what happens, right? That's not how we deliver on features and make end users happy. And that's not to say that like code golf and like competitive programming problems, and being good at these things is not a really cool skill. It's so interesting. If any of you have seen one of Connor Hoekstra's talks, you know what I'm talking about. He'll get like a 6-sentence word problem, and he'll be like, and so obviously, the answer is A, Blue Jay combinator, squiggly line, smiley face emoji, Egyptian hieroglyphic for A. And you're like, what? Like, it's quite a cool skill, and he runs it, and he's right. It works, but it's just like, is it a good interview question? Well, we have to go back and say, well, does it assess a candidate's ability to perform a job successfully? And I really think that we just proved that it doesn't really. On every core fundamental pillar of engineering competency, these problems fall down. All right, another story time. I was at CBP North, which is a great conference in Toronto, and one of the keynote speakers was the inventor of the advent of code. And for those of you who don't know, advent of code is a series of puzzles that are released around the holidays, and they're competitive programming type questions. And I, being the rambunctious troublemaker that I am, I mean, you saw that with the AV debacle. I asked him, I said, how do you feel about the fact that companies are using this as a litmus test for entry into engineering roles? And I loved his response. He goes, I get calls all the time to implement problems for companies, for interviews, and I tell them to go pound sand because these problems are not good interview questions. And I asked him, why do you think that? And he said, well, they're low signal. They're ambiguous. If a candidate can't get the answer to one of these problems, they might have just gotten stuck at the aha moment, right? And just gotten stuck there with the problem signature. It doesn't tell you that they won't be a valuable employee. And if they do get the question right, it also doesn't tell you that much either. I literally had a friend once who told me that he was interviewing and the interviewer asked him a question. And he said, hey, I've seen a problem just like this very recently. And the interviewer was like, that's fine, just implement it. Right? It's just that we're not getting good signals. All right, so let's talk quickly about why this is bad for all of you people here. One, it keeps engineers out of jobs they might actually perform well at. And it keeps engineers in jobs that we don't want to be at, right? Because we really don't want to go through the whole process of interviewing. Why don't we want to go through the whole process of interviewing? Well, because it takes a ton of time. I mean, when I gave you that diagram in the beginning, there were, 8 hours of interviews, and that's per job. So say you're applying to 4 different jobs, that's 32 hours of just the interview, let alone the 3 to 4 months of preparation on nights and weekends that you are doing practice problems, right? It takes a lot of time. We don't want to do it. We have other stuff to do with our lives, right? I have hobbies. And the other reason it's bad for us as engineers is because it keeps our compensation artificially low. And I know you care about that, right? And the reason that this happens is because the canonical way to make more money in our industry is to job hop, right? So if you can't do these interviews regularly, you're not maximizing your compensation. And it can also create pay disparities because if somebody is not good at this specific type of question, they're not gonna have that opportunity to increase their salary. Okay, why is this bad for companies? One, it keeps away talent, right? There are a lot of engineers that could be great employees and are just not making it through your interview process. Two, who do you think is paying for all of that time that an engineer spends interviewing somewhere else? The company they currently work at. Three, when an engineer stays in a job they don't like, they're not productive. As the Gen Zers would say, they quiet quit, right? That's why that happens. It keeps these job openings vacant for so long. Somebody told me that the average time to fill a senior engineering position is 9 months. That's I don't know, that's a million years in the world that we're living in right now, with AI, right? You're missing the opportunity to be a first mover. You're missing the opportunity to get a product to market because you're keeping these seats open for so long. And it creates homogeneous teams. So if we have one totality metric for engineering success and engineering excellency, we are going to keep hiring the same person over and over and over again. And study after study has shown that the most effective teams are the ones that are comprised of different types of people with different skills, right? So this is we're trying to get work done with two hands tied behind our back. You really do get thirsty up here. Hold on. All right. So now that I've convinced you all that it's bad, the world is bad, we're having a bad time, we can get into the section about what we can do to fix things. So we have to ask ourselves another question, which is, how do we identify these skills? And the way that we do that is we ask better questions. There are some things that make a question a good question. This is, again, when you borrow tech, you mess up. What makes a question a good question? Well, there are a couple of things. One, a good question will be high signal, right? If a candidate can answer the question, it's a good indicator that they will do a good job on the job. If they can't answer the question, it's a good indicator that they might not be well suited for the position. Good questions will have many right answers, right? More than one, right? So, hold on. Good questions will have more than one right answer. It will have more than two right answers, like most LeetCode problems do. It should have an infinite number of potential directions a candidate could take that question in. Good questions filter out poor candidates. This gets back to the good questions having high signals, but I understand that we do have limited resources and we need to be able to understand if somebody is obviously not well suited for the role. So good questions will weed out people that wouldn't perform well at the job. All right. Good questions allow candidates to demonstrate a variety of different skills. For some reason, when you look up stock photos of variety, you get fruit bowls. So here we are. All right. So now that I've given you the philosoph... Oh, wait. No, there's another one. There's more. See, this is why you have to have the speaker notes. Okay. Good questions should start simply and be extendable. And that will allow you to assess a candidate's competency along a continuous range, right? Good questions should directly value real-world experience, right? We are hiring people because of their experience on their previous jobs, which means that we should be assessing skills that they learned on their previous job. Their previous job should be the preparation for the interview. Any candidate without prerequisite real-world experience should be easily identified by the question. There should be no aha moments, right? In order to have an unambiguous signal and to get a continuous range of value assessment on a candidate's competency, There can't be a moment of brilliance required to get started on the question. It should be easy for the candidate to jump in and provide some sort of signal immediately. That's my fault for wanting to walk around the stage so much. Such a big stage, and there's so many of you over there. I don't want to be stuck over here the entire time, right? That's not fair. All right, let's get into some examples of good questions, right? Like, I want to provide concrete solutions for this problem that has bothered me for so many years. All right, what is your favorite thing about X language, your favorite feature or paradigm? What is your least favorite thing about X language? Why? This is a good question because it has many right answers, right? Like a candidate could talk about how they love operator overloading in C++, or they like compile time evaluation, or they really love polymorphism. Like there's a million ways to answer this question. There's as many ways as there are features in the language or things in the standard library. But if they can't answer the question, it'll be immediately obvious they've probably never written C++ before. If you don't have a single bad thing to say about this language, you have never written in it, right? So anybody that can't come up with some sort of response, you probably know they're not going to be good for a C++ role. It allows candidates to demonstrate a variety of skill sets, right? So if a candidate is really keen on API design, they're probably going to talk about operator overloading or function overloading because it lets you design idiomatic, intuitive APIs. But if they're really keyed in on efficiency, they'll probably talk about compile time evaluation, right? You're giving the candidate an ability to demonstrate a variety of different things that they are good and passionate about. Good at and passionate about. It starts simple and can be extended. I mean, right, like if you're an interviewer, you probably have an understanding of the language that you're asking about, so you can just keep asking follow-up questions. It directly values real-world experience. Again, if you have nothing bad to say about this language, you have no real-world experience with it. And there are no aha moments. I mean, like, you just think about what's something that you like or you don't like about C++. Another question, design some software meant to represent an elevator. I like this question because it has many right answers, right? Like, you're not telling the candidate how to implement you're not telling a candidate how to implement this, right? You are kind of following the candidate along as they do the implementation. But if you can't get started at this problem at all, it'll easily filter out people that are ill-suited. It does allow candidates to demonstrate a variety of skill sets, right? API design. Do they design intuitive and testable APIs? Do they start with a unit test, right? Are they thinking about an API that will be easy to unit test down the road? How do they design their code? Do they understand modularity and encapsulation? Do they have an understanding of resource allocation, right? Like, there's a bunch of stuff that you can assess with this one question. It can start simple and it can be extended. Say the candidate knocks it out of the park. You can say, hey, now you've got a whole elevator bank, right? What would you do with that? It does directly value real-world experience, right? Like, this is just straight-up application programming. And there are no aha moments. I mean, you can get started on this problem pretty quickly. Another one that I think is good, review this piece of code. Take a code snippet, write a code review. I like this question because it has many right answers, right? If you have a well-structured snippet of code, you can have some easy-to-find issues. You could have some really hard-to-find issues. But if you have some easy-to-find issues, a candidate can get those out right away. And like, the world of responses is literally just as many words in the English language, right? They're typing out their code comments. Many, many right answers. If they can't do a code review at all, it'll be pretty immediately obvious. It allows the candidate to demonstrate a variety of skills. Again, if you have a well-structured snippet of code, you can have some stuff that's really easy to find. You can have some weird signed to unsigned integer conversion bug that like only a specific type of person might get. And then you can have just like, wow, this is a terrible variable name, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that you can, actually, that was my start simple and can be extended example, right? If you have some easy to find issues and some difficult to find issues, right, you are assessing a candidate on a continuum. It does directly value real-world experience. I don't know about you all, but I review a lot of code, and I write a lot of comments. And there are no aha moments. Again, if you have some easy-to-find problems, you should be able to get started on this question right away. All right, This is my absolute favorite one, because if you have not figured this out by now, I really like yapping. I like chatting, I like talking. It's been really difficult for me to stay in my hotel room and practice this talk. Clearly I didn't practice enough because I don't have absolutely everything memorized, but in fairness, I did expect to have speaker notes. So maybe that's on me. And now it's been hard to be in my hotel room and not be talking to all of you, right? Like, my favorite part of this conference is just like chatting with people, learning about their experiences, talking about their technical problems, that sort of stuff. I like this question because it has many right answers. It has as many right answers as there have been projects in the history of software engineering. If you cannot come up with one thing that you have delivered on that you are excited about talking about, like, it's gonna be pretty immediately obvious. It allows candidates to demonstrate a variety of skill sets. Again, like, if you're really passionate about API design, you're probably gonna talk about something involving API design. If you're really passionate about efficiency, I don't know, you're gonna talk about some weird Intel intrinsic thing that you did and I wouldn't understand. It can start simple and it can be extended. I mean, like, the interviewer can just ask you more and more follow-up questions, right? Like, how did you do this? How did you do that? Like, did you take this or this or this into account, right? How did you decide which trade-off to make? It directly values real-world experience. I mean, like, we're talking about real things that we have delivered on our jobs, in our jobs. And there are no aha moments. Like, of course, you can just kind of start talking about something that you did because you did it. There's no moment of brilliance associated with that. Like, you actually did the work. Okay, my story for this slide is I was in an interview once, and the interviewer introduced himself and we started chatting, and I told him a little bit about what I work on. And he was immediately fascinated with, like, all of the stuff with the Clang libraries, the abstract syntax tree. He wanted to understand more about this really information-rich data structure, what kind of stuff we could extract from it, how we write refactoring tools. And we just chatted for the full 40 minutes. And at the end, and I thought that was the interview, right? At the end, he goes, "Kristen, I was supposed to ask you a LeetCode problem." And I was like, "Oh, you were?" And he goes, "Yeah, but I really enjoyed our discussion," right? Like, I have the highest opinion I could possibly have of you at this point in time. Do you want to do the LeetCode problem? And I'm like, you're asking me if I want to do the LeetCode problem. No, I'm good, no. All right, another aspect of, like, wait, hold on. No, again, so that's, sorry, again, can't see the next slide. All right, so those are some examples of good questions. Another way that I think we can fix this currently broken process is giving candidates some agency in terms of how they're evaluated. Sort of like a choose your own adventure interview, right? As long as your questions are good, it really shouldn't matter which question a candidate decides to answer or which route they decide to be evaluated. Do they want to do a take-home test? Do they want to do a live interviewing problem, right? And this brings me to another talk that I went to at CBP North, really good conference, another keynote. April Wenzel is the founder of Compassionate Coding, and she gave a really interesting keynote. And afterward, we started talking about, the problem with the current software engineering interview process. And she gave me this really great quotation. And I'm gonna read it after I have a sip of water. Man, you get so thirsty up here. Oh. If you want to attract and welcome a broader set of people as software engineers, then you need to provide a broader sense of opportunities to show that they have the abilities and the skills. Otherwise, we're going to make a lot of assumptions about a quote-unquote, about what a quote-unquote good engineer is. And I really love this quotation. And I have another colleague that I think put it really well when he said, when he interviews, he looks for reasons to hire the candidate. He wants to extract the skill sets that they're excited about, that they're competent in. He doesn't look for reasons to not hire the candidate, right? And, like, that's currently what our system does. Okay, another way that I think we can help fix this broken system is, for any question that we're asking, especially live coding questions, we need to be realistic about the expectations we have for candidates. And I have some sayings here, and I'm curious, I'm gonna ask for some audience input. The reason it's important that we are realistic and we remind ourselves about what it's like to not know the answer to a problem is because the perceived difficulty of a problem is directly proportional to how familiar one is with the solution, or put more simply, all problems seem trivial when you already know the answer, right? It's so tempting as an interviewer to go into your interview bank, see that there's a question, be like, okay, I like this question, and say, you know, I could solve this, but I'm not going to because I have other important things to do, and just look up the answer. And then when you see the answer, you go, ah, yeah, obviously I could have gotten that, right? That's really, really tempting. But it's just like not what would have actually happened if you had tried to solve the problem from scratch. We need to be more realistic with what we expect these benchmarks to be, right? And I would advise people who are conducting interviews to use their colleagues as a benchmark, right? If your colleagues cannot answer an interview question, it's a bad question because your colleagues are the people that are currently working at your company, right? Like, if you are an L5 at Google and you have an L5 software engineering question, go ask an L5. See what they come up with, right? I have another fun story. So I have a colleague and he was conducting an interview and he was looking at his interview bank and he came across that graph rainwater collecting problem. And he couldn't solve the question, right? He's like, I don't know how to do this. And then he went to all of his teammates and said, hey, can you solve this question? And not a single one of his teammates could solve the question. So like, why would we ask that question? We are hiring for this company and nobody here can answer the question. Like that to me says, this is a bad question. All right. I have heard engineers say 1,000,000 times, I would not pass my company's interview if I had to do it today. I mean, I'm not gonna ask you to raise your hands because I did that before and there were a lot of people that were like, oh, I'm good, LeetCode's fine. But I hear this all the time, right? I have a lot of friends that are like, if I had to interview for Facebook or Meta or Google right now, I wouldn't get the job. And they're like L6s, L7s, right? They're like productive employees at these companies. If we are doing a take-home test, again, use your existing network to understand how long something actually takes or how much progress somebody could be expected to make in an allotted amount of time. If you just tell a candidate this should take you 2 hours, and you ask the candidate when they're done how long it took them, they're gonna say 2 hours. Because they don't want you to think, oh my God, this took me a day and a half, I'm such an idiot, right? And I know this for a fact because I had a technical recruiter give me okay, like come interview for this company, like, and their first round was a take-home test. And I looked at it and I'm like, this is gonna take me a day and a half. He's like, no, it should only take you a couple hours. I'm like, this is gonna take me a day and a half. And lo and behold, spoiler alert, it took me a day and a half. And I told him, and he said, no one's ever said that to me before. And I said, really? Because like, it took me a full day and a half. And I felt a little bit bad about it, but then I had a friend who did the same interview. And I was chatting with him when he was done, with the take home, and I said, hey, how long did it take you? And he said, oh, it took me a day and a half. And I said, how long did you tell the interviewer it took you? He's like, 2 hours. Like, if we don't provide, like, accurate feedback, like, we're just perpetuating the issues with the system. All right. So yeah, for technical recruiters, don't trust the candidate feedback about how long a problem takes. They will tell you it took them as long as you said they would. Maybe they'll shave off 15 minutes so they look really impressive. All right, another thing that I think we should address is we should for a moment turn our gaze and talk about the interviewer themselves. Who conducts an interview and when they conduct an interview is a huge source of variance in the interview process. If this is you, the day that you are conducting an interview, your candidate is gonna have a bad time. If I'm a candidate and I happen to get an interview that thinks and acts and talks like me, I'm gonna have a huge advantage. In either of these instances, I'm gonna get more tips, more help. They might be writing more agreeable feedback. Because when you're in a better mood or you personally identify with a candidate, you'll give them more hints and you'll be nicer when you're evaluating them. All right, my next slide is an assertion that I think we can all agree with, right? Good individual contributors are not always good managers. And I make this point to highlight another point, which is that just because somebody's a software engineer doesn't mean they're good at everything, right? You can have a skill set as an engineer, and you could miss the mark on some, other types of jobs. So why do we immediately expect software engineers to be good interviewers, right? Like, it's a question I feel like we should ask ourselves. And maybe at large companies who can afford it, we should consider having a dedicated job function for asking interview questions. At smaller companies, maybe consider outsourcing the questions or hiring consultants. This is a win-win, right? Because it's going to save companies time and engineering hours, which are our most valuable resource and should be used sparingly. And professional hiring teams can refine rubrics and create fairer, more standardized processes. All right, you have been with me for 57 minutes so far. I'm actually doing really well on time. So Phil, don't worry, we're gonna be golden. I always talk really fast, so if I was talking too fast during this presentation, I apologize, but I always end up finishing my talks on time, so. Silver lining. All right, at this point, I hope that I've convinced you that our current process is bad, right? It's a bad time, everybody's having a bad time. The interview process is fundamentally flawed again, but not irrevocably broken. But the current state of affairs would potentially make somebody who was thinking about interviewing decide instead to start from scratch in an entirely new vertical and become a real estate agent in New York City. And you guys think I'm kidding? Sorry. Y'all think I'm kidding? Apologies, correcting myself. But that's actually my website. I literally found it less intimidating to build an entirely new career from scratch than do the 3 to 4 months of prep, interview at a bunch of companies. I was kind of teetering, about whether or not I was interested in continuing to pursue software engineering. And had it been easier to try out a new job, I would have stuck around. Maybe I was just a little dissatisfied with what I was doing currently. I'd been on the same team for 8 years. Maybe I just needed a change. But, suffice it to say, if it's easier to start a new career in an entirely new industry, that's not a good place to be, for software. I really should tell you something. I would rather be on TikTok as a millennial than do a LeetCode problem, right? That's bad. We don't love that. All right, a little bit of background on this talk, too. So at this point in time, you've probably recognized the fact that I look a little bit different from some of the keynote speakers that you're used to seeing at these software engineering conferences. And you're right, it's the glasses. I have a little bit of a medical issue. I have issues with my eyes. They're very, very sensitive. And I promise there's a point to this whole thing. And for a long time, I was really ashamed to talk about it, right? I didn't want to be vulnerable. I didn't want to expose myself. I thought I was the only one with a weird medical problem. And by telling somebody else, I might be doing myself a disservice. When I was thinking about this talk, I had a party. And one of the guests at my party was my friend Titus. He is the author of the Software Engineering at Google book. He's very well respected. He's a great guy, very, very smart. And we were chatting, and he had a vulnerable moment with me where he told me that he actually had a really hard time with the interview process. This person is an L8 at Google. He's a principal engineer, right? And he's struggling with the interview process. And in that moment, when he told me, I was able to tell him, oh, actually, I also have issues with the interview process, right? As soon as somebody admits to somebody else that they had trouble, you start opening up. The same with weird medical stuff, As soon as you tell somebody, oh, you have this problem, they're like, oh, yeah, I have this weird bulging disc issue, I have this weird bulging disc issue, or my knee's wonky. We all have a problem, right? And it just takes that moment of vulnerability to really understand that we're not alone, right? So I have a challenge for the audience. So it can feel like when you interview at a company that you were really excited about working at and you don't get a job offer, that you're a failure. But every single person at this conference has failed. Wait, sorry. I have very specific wording for this, and I want to make sure I get it right. Okay, every single person at this conference works for a company where someone else interviewed and didn't get a job, right? You might even work at a company where that person interviewed and they didn't get a job, right? So suffice it to say, like, we have a lot of, there's a lot to feel good about, right? Even when we don't get the position that we interviewed at. And in sharing these stories, we can start fixing the problem. So my challenge to you is to talk to somebody at this conference about an interview that you didn't pass, right? And I don't say fail intentionally because I don't think it's failure. I think it's a problem with the process itself. But just open up, talk to somebody about a company that you interviewed at where you didn't get the job. I will start. I've interviewed at HRT, Citadel, and Meta. Did not get jobs at any of those companies. Yeah, so that's my challenge to you. My other challenge would be the next time you go into an interview and you get one of these problems that you don't think is a good problem, to say, that's a bad problem and I'm not gonna answer it, but I realize that's a bigger ask. So we're gonna start with the other one. All right, so as I mentioned, I am a phenomenal real estate agent in New York City. And I can help you anywhere in the world. If you or anyone you know might need assistance with anything real estate related, this is my contact information. Or if you want to just chat, that's totally fine. This QR code will take you to my link tree. So you can follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok, do whatever, send me an email. Yeah, I mean, you could be one of the only people that gets to say, an ex-staff software engineer helped me find this home. I mean, that's cool, right? I get you. I'll do spreadsheets. It's a party. Like, I love helping my tech clients. Oh, and technical recruiters, I don't know if any of them are left here, but if you have a reload team and you want your candidates to really love you, connect them with me and I'll help them find their home, and you found them their job. We've just made their life great. They'll love you forever. Okay. We are at the end of this talk. Does anyone have any questions?